Ma'am, good morning. What are you doing out here?
Good morning, officer. I just grabbed a coffee.
Can I see your ID, please? You match the description of someone we've been trying to locate for a while.
I'm not sure why, but look, I'm a state attorney. I have nothing to do with whatever you're looking for.
Let me see it anyway.
Monica Ellis, 24th District, Assistant State's Attorney.
You're aware you look a lot like our suspect, right?
Fine,
We've been
let's
chasing her
get
for
this
months.
On a quiet spring morning in 2024, a woman walked out of a popular neighborhood coffee shop with a cup of coffee and ended up in handcuffs. She hadn't committed a crime. She hadn't resisted. She hadn't lied. She was a state attorney, and yet within minutes, her rights were gone. What followed became the catalyst for a $2 million civil rights settlement, the termination of a sworn police officer, and a case study in how professional credentials and constitutional protections can collapse under the weight of confirmation bias and institutional arrogance. The encounter, preserved in its entirety through body-worn camera footage, offers a window into the mechanics of wrongful detention, the fragility of verification procedures, and the moments when law enforcement authority crosses the line from investigative inquiry into civil rights violation. What begins as a seemingly innocuous interaction outside a commercial parking lot escalates into an unlawful arrest of a sitting assistant state attorney, a legal professional tasked with prosecuting the very system that detained her without cause. If you appreciate the in-depth legal breakdowns we provide on this channel, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss future cases that challenge accountability in law enforcement. Also, drop a comment below and let us know where in the world you're watching from. Now, let's continue with this remarkable case. The body cam activates with a timestamp reading late morning, the heads-up display tracking GPS coordinates as the officer's patrol vehicle pulls into the coffee shop parking lot. The camera captures a woman in her early 40s exiting the entrance, coffee cup in hand, brown leather handbag over her shoulder. She is dressed professionally in a dark blue coat over a sky blue blouse, black trousers, and polished black shoes, her short wig neatly styled. She walks with purpose toward a brown Lexus ES350, her movements unhurried and routine. The officer exits his vehicle and begins moving toward her with deliberate pace, his hand resting on his duty belt as he closes the distance. The first words exchanged are cordial but immediately weighted with authority. The officer greets her with a flat "good morning" and asks what she is doing out here, a question that frames her presence as something requiring justification. She responds politely, explaining she just grabbed a coffee, her tone neither defensive nor evasive. The officer does not acknowledge her explanation. Instead, he requests identification, stating that she matches the description of someone they have been trying to locate. The language is deliberately vague, offering no specifics about the nature of the investigation, the severity of the alleged offense, or the particulars of the description she supposedly matches. This lack of transparency is a tactical choice, designed to create pressure and compliance through ambiguity. She responds immediately by identifying herself as a state attorney, clarifying that she has nothing to do with whatever investigation the officer believes is relevant. Her tone remains measured, professional, the response of someone accustomed to legal frameworks and procedural expectations. The officer dismisses her statement with a terse directive to let him see her identification anyway. She provides her name clearly and without hesitation, identifying herself as Monica Ellis, Assistant State Attorney for the 24th District. This is not a casual claim or a deflection. It is a direct invocation of professional identity, a statement that should trigger immediate verification and caution on the part of any law enforcement officer. The Fourth Amendment protects individuals from unreasonable searches and seizures, and the threshold for investigative detention requires reasonable suspicion, a standard that must be articulable, specific, and based on objective facts rather than generalized resemblance. The officer's response betrays his indifference to these legal standards. He tells her she looks like their suspect, a statement that reduces the foundation of his authority to physical similarity rather than particularized evidence. The inherent danger of identification based solely on appearance is well documented in wrongful detention and false arrest litigation. Studies on eyewitness misidentification and cross-racial recognition errors consistently demonstrate that reliance on visual resemblance without corroborating factors leads to constitutional violations and miscarriages of justice. She responds with resignation, agreeing to get it over with, her words reflecting a pragmatic calculation that compliance may expedite resolution. What follows is an escalation that violates both constitutional protections and basic investigative competence. The officer orders her into handcuffs, citing procedure and safety, language that transforms a purported investigative stop into a custodial arrest without probable cause. Handcuffing an individual who has identified herself as a legal officer, who has provided her name and professional credentials, and who has shown no signs of flight risk or physical resistance, exceeds the boundaries of reasonable detention. As she stands with her hands restrained behind her back, the officer makes a comment that reveals the subtext of the encounter. He remarks on "people like you," a phrase loaded with racialized implication, and asks if she has a twin, as though her insistence on mistaken identity is itself suspicious. These statements are not incidental. They reflect a pattern of bias in which her professional status, her clear identification, and her calm demeanor are subordinated to a preconceived narrative shaped by her appearance and race. She is placed in the back of the patrol vehicle and transported to the station, the bodycam capturing her silent profile as the urban landscape scrolls past the window. During the drive, the officer makes additional comments characterizing her as aggressive, a descriptor wholly unsupported by the footage. At no point during the encounter does she raise her voice, resist physically, or engage in behavior that could be reasonably construed as threatening. The accusation of aggression is a rhetorical tool, a method of preemptively framing her as uncooperative in anticipation of scrutiny. This tactic is familiar in cases where law enforcement seeks to justify escalation or deflect criticism. By the time they arrive at the station, the detention has consumed over 30 minutes, and no effort has been made to verify her identity through departmental databases, calls to the state attorney's office, or basic investigative cross-referencing. Inside the station, she is processed through intake procedures typically reserved for arrestees. Her personal belongings are cataloged, she is photographed, and she is placed in a holding area pending further investigation. The body cam footage shows her seated on a bench, still composed, her expression revealing frustration rather than panic. The processing officers go through the motions with bureaucratic efficiency, seemingly unaware or indifferent to the fact that the individual in custody is a state attorney whose identity could be confirmed with a single phone call. The failure to verify at this stage is not a matter of technological limitation or resource constraint. It is a failure of initiative, a breakdown in the most basic expectation of due diligence. Meanwhile, the database already contains information that should have resolved the matter within minutes. The suspect the officer claimed to be pursuing has a different address, a different build, a different age, and a record of prior contact that includes fingerprints and photographic identification. None of these discrepancies are consulted before Monica Elise is detained. Hours pass. The holding area is cold, fluorescent lit, designed for discomfort rather than accommodation. She is offered water, but no explanation, no timeline, no clarity about when or whether someone in authority will intervene. The detention stretches beyond any conceivable justification under Terry stop standards, which permit only brief investigative holds absent probable cause for arrest. The Supreme Court has repeatedly emphasized that investigative detentions must be limited in scope and duration, tethered to the specific circumstances that justified the initial stop. Here, the detention persists not because of ongoing investigation, but because of institutional inertia and the arresting officer's refusal to acknowledge error. Eventually, a supervisor is alerted to the situation, not through internal review, but through external inquiry. The state attorney's office, noticing her prolonged absence and unresponsiveness to communication, initiates contact with the police department. The supervisor, upon learning that an assistant state attorney has been held for hours without charge or verification, orders her immediate release. The body cam footage of the release is brief and devoid of apology. She is escorted from the holding area, her belongings returned without ceremony. The arresting officer is not present, and no formal acknowledgement of wrongdoing is offered at the time of discharge. She leaves the station and drives home, the experience unresolved and the violation unaddressed. In the days that follow, an internal affairs investigation is initiated, a procedural response triggered by the visibility of the case and the involvement of a legal professional. The investigation reviews the body cam footage, interviews the involved officers, and examines departmental protocols related to verification and identification. The findings are unambiguous. The arresting officer failed to establish reasonable suspicion sufficient to justify the initial detention, failed to verify Monica Elise's identity despite her clear self-identification, ignored established procedures for cross-referencing suspects with available databases, and engaged in conduct that suggested racial bias and procedural disregard. The internal investigation concludes with a recommendation for termination, a decision the police chief ultimately approves. The officer is dismissed from the department, a consequence that addresses individual accountability but leaves systemic questions unanswered. In the days that follow, Monica Elise files a federal civil rights lawsuit under Section 1983, alleging unlawful detention, false arrest, and violation of her Fourth Amendment protections. The lawsuit names both the individual officer and the municipality, arguing that the city's failure to implement adequate training, supervision, and verification protocols created the conditions for constitutional violations. The legal standard for municipal liability requires demonstrating a policy, practice, or custom that directly caused the violation, a threshold difficult to meet but not insurmountable in cases where systemic failures are evident. The city's decision to settle the case for $2 million reflects a calculation that the evidence, including the body cam footage and the internal investigation findings, would likely result in a verdict unfavorable to the defense. Settlements of this magnitude serve multiple functions. They compensate the victim for the violation of constitutional rights, the professional humiliation, and the emotional toll of wrongful detention. They also signal institutional recognition of fault without requiring a formal admission of liability in court. Yet the settlement does not resolve the deeper questions exposed by the case. The officer's termination addresses individual misconduct, but it does not explain how a law enforcement professional could disregard basic verification procedures, ignore the self-identification of a legal officer, and persist in detention despite mounting evidence of error. The internal investigation identifies failures, but it does not mandate systemic reforms in training, supervision, or accountability structures. The case of Monica Elise is not an isolated aberration. It is a reflection of vulnerabilities embedded in law enforcement practice, vulnerabilities that manifest when authority is exercised without meaningful oversight, when verification procedures are treated as optional, and when racial bias, conscious or unconscious, influences decision-making at critical moments. Misidentification remains a persistent risk in policing, particularly in cases where officers rely on subjective visual assessments rather than objective corroborating evidence. The pressure to make arrests, to close investigations, and to demonstrate proactive enforcement can create incentives that override careful verification. When those subjected to wrongful detention are individuals without professional credentials, without access to legal resources, and without the institutional connections that might prompt supervisory intervention, the consequences can be far more severe and far less visible. The fact that Monica Elise was a state attorney likely accelerated her release and ensured accountability, But it also highlights a troubling reality. Those without her professional standing may endure prolonged detention, criminal charges, and lasting harm without the same level of scrutiny or remedy. The case leaves us with uncomfortable questions about fairness, about the consistency of constitutional protections, and about the mechanisms, or lack thereof, that prevent similar violations from recurring. The body cam footage ends, the investigation concludes, the settlement is finalized, but the systemic weaknesses remain, waiting for the next encounter where authority and error intersect without sufficient safeguards to intervene. If this analysis has given you insight into the complexities of law enforcement accountability and civil rights protections, please subscribe to the channel for more detailed breakdowns of cases that matter. Your support helps us continue bringing these important stories to light.